Hello and welcome to Cleaning Up History, where my goal is preservation of headstones and cemeteries while telling forgotten stories of the past. Today I'm doing a tutorial on the how, why, and when to clean a headstone. And real quick, I'm just going to show you the tools that I carry. I have garden sprayers with lots of water, plastic scrapers, soft brushes, soap, scissors, and biological cleaner in a spray bottle as well. These are the tools that I take with me every time I go to clean a headstone. So in addition to the hobby of genealogy and history preservation, another hobby of mine that I've had for many years is lapidary work, collecting, polishing, cutting of different types of rocks and minerals. So I'm somewhat familiar with the topic on stones. So that did help me with my research when I started researching how to clean headstones, because I already kind of had an idea of the different hardness for different types of stones. I am going to say that I'm definitely not an expert on this matter. This is hobbies of mine only, so I advise you to do your own research. But I am going to provide links to some of the resources that I found, and I'll provide those in the description below. Now, one of the questions that I've seen a lot is why? Why clean the headstones off? The moss and the growth on the headstones is what gives the older cemeteries their charm, that feeling of being, in an old cemetery, showing that it's actually old. And my answer to that is for preservation. If you have moss or lichens or mold or any kind of biological growth on a stone, there's more than you see on the surface. There's actually roots that grow down into the pores of the stone and will deteriorate that stone much quicker than it normally would. So that is why, to prevent that biological material from damaging the stone. And then there's when should you clean a stone, and that is when you start seeing biological growth, or grass clippings and things like that. Those can just be brushed off with a soft brush, and there's no need to use anything else. But if you start seeing biological growth, that's when the stone needs to be cleaned. And then there's the bigger question. It is how to properly clean a headstone without causing further damage, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. So, my number one rule is always wet the stone first. You have least resistance, and you're least likely to scratch the surface of the stone, which may still have a polish on it. So always wet the stone first. That's the first step. Always have plenty of water whenever you go with intent on cleaning up headstones. So my process is I start by wetting the stone, and I'll let the water soak in a minute, and then I use one of these plastic scrapers to scrape off any of the surface material that I can get with the scraper. And I keep it wet the whole time. The whole entire process, I like to keep the stone wet. So I start by scraping off the material after the stone is wet, and then followed by a spraying of a biological solution. Now, this is the topic that seems to be debated among some communities as to what solution you should use. And the link that I'm going to provide is from the National Cemetery Association, and it includes a list of both soaps and biological cleaners that are approved and safe to use. I've also got a screenshot with the biological cleaner circled, because you'll often come across someone who says, oh, well, they use this at this cemetery, this is a national brand, you should use this is the only thing you should use. There are several biocides that are approved for this purpose. And what these biocides are is, it's a quaternary ammonia that will kill off the biological growth. So I take this particular biocide that I use, and I spray it on the stone and let it soak. The longer you can let it soak, the better. I normally shoot for 15 to 20 minutes at least, but the longer you can soak it, the better. But again, you want to try to keep the stone wet during the entire process. So the list of cleaners that are approved, they are brand names Prosco, Revive, Cathedral Stone Bio Cleaner, Wet and Forget, and D2. Those are all approved by the National Cemetery Association for cleaning of military headstones. And these military headstones, you will find that they are made of marble, like the one I'm working on today. There are some granite, and there are also some bronze military stones. And these solutions are approved for use on all three of those stone types. Marble is a little bit of a softer stone. It's around 3 to 4 on the Moss scale, so it's a little bit softer and easier to damage, so you do want to use minimal scrubbing on those to keep from wearing it down. But I spray on the solution and let it soak, and then I take my brushes and I scrub it in if there's any of that biological material left on the surface of the stone, and there usually is after you scrape it. Just use your brush and in a circular motion and scrub that solution into the material, and then continue to let it soak while keeping it wet. This is the process that I do. So I'll scrub and scrub and scrub, and oftentimes I will, after letting that soak for a while, I will rinse it completely off and then soak it again in the solution and let it soak for a little while longer. I always rinse thoroughly the cleaners off the stones. That is also something that I've been questioned, or there's been a little bit of a debate about. So on one particular cleaner, the instructions are to just spray it on and leave it, and that the wind and the rain will do the work for you, and you come back months later and the stone will be like new. I have done this before, and it does work. I've tried this on my personal family stones, and it works like a charm. However, there are some preservationists who do not recommend this due to the fact that there's not been long-term research. So they're not saying that it will harm the stone, or that they think it will harm the stone. They're just saying that they would like more research long-term. If you soak a marble stone in this biological solution and leave it, in 20 years, would that have made a difference in the deterioration process of the stone? So it's not that it will cause damage, but it's possible that long-term it will. So they don't recommend that you leave it on. So I've got some messages saying, hey, you're doing it wrong, you're just supposed to spray it on and leave it. Well, that's my explanation as to why. If it's a stone that does not belong to my immediate family, I'm not going to do that due to the fact that preservationists do not recommend it as of now. But with that being said, with the cleaning process that I do after soaking it, and sometimes I'll even soak it for a couple of hours if I've got time. The longer it soaks, the longer amount of time it has to kill off this growth that's on the stone. So, and once you rinse it off, it does still continue to work. You rinse it thoroughly, rinse everything off, make sure that you rinse it to where you're getting everything out of the pores of the stone. But the solution, where it's soaked on that biological material, that material that's still left on the stone, it still has that solution in it. And that solution will continue to work, and that material will continue to fall off and lighten up. And over several months' time, the stone will look a whole lot better than when you leave it. Like after you get done cleaning it, it's still going to look dirty per se. You're still going to see some staining and things on it. But in a few months when you come back, the stone will look a lot better than it did. Now, if you just have a polished granite stone that still has the nice polish on the surface, but you're starting to get some moss growth or something on it, you can use a soap detergent. What I personally use is Ivory soap, and the only reason I use that is one of the approved soaps for this purpose. The reason I use Ivory is because I already have some on hand for my other hobby of polishing stones and tumblers and such. I use Ivory soap for that here, so I have an abundance of it. So I just mixed me up a solution in a spray bottle, and I use that on the polished stones that aren't in too bad of shape, that doesn't need the biological solution. And I use sponges. I've got some sponges in my box too, and with the soap, and just wash it off and rinse it off good. And that's sufficient for the newer stones, instead of having to use the biological solution. Yesterday I came across some older headstones in one of the local cemeteries, and I'm going to put a picture of one of them up here. It looks like somebody had attempted to scrape off some of the material, and they did it while it was dry, and you can see all the scratch marks. That please always make sure that the stone's wet before you try to remove anything, and use soft material, something softer than the stone. So the best practice is just to use a soft brush, like a toothbrush. My favorite tool is the softer children's toothbrushes, and they get down in the lettering of the stones that are engraved, and get into all the details. That's my favorite tool to use, is just a soft kid's toothbrush. I also have some, little toothpicks, plastic toothpicks, to get down in the lettering too. Wood is also acceptable. Some people use, like the stuff you can get in the paint department, the wooden sticks to stir paint, and that's great. It's a softer material than the stone, and it's a great choice to use also. But I have several ancestor stones that are illegible. You can't read them anymore. I have several that I can't locate, and that is my goal, is to make all of these stones last as long as possible. I'm aware that a headstone is not a permanent document, but I'd like them to be as permanent as possible. So in six generations from now, these kids can come up here and find these stones still yet, and be able to read them, and be able to do the research that they'd like on their family tree, without the stumbling blocks of not being able to locate the graves, which I'm sure that'll still happen, but that's my goal, is to keep that from happening as much as possible. So I used this Civil War headstone as a sample, mainly because this is one of the marble stones that is mentioned by the National Cemetery Association for this cleaning list that I'm going to provide you guys, and I'm going to put a screenshot up as well. So I use this Civil War headstone just as a sample to do this quick tutorial on. So I hope that I've answered some of your questions. I hope that I've helped. And again, always do your own research. Figure out what kind of material the stone is. Make sure that it's not damaged. If you don't want one that's loose at a base, and when you go to pressure brush on it, it's going to topple over and crack. I'll always check and make sure it's stable before cleaning it. So that's all I've got for you guys today, and I hope that this has been a helpful tutorial, and I hope that maybe I've brought up something that you guys hadn't thought of, or answered some of the questions that you had. I also want to mention that you don't want to use any chlorine bleach on headstones, because chlorine, when it evaporates, it leaves these small crystals behind, and those crystals would form down in the pores of the stone and crack the stone. So please don't use chlorine or any wire brushes or any harsh chemicals that could damage the stone. Like I said, there is this list of approved cleaners that you can use that are effective and helpful, and they take care of all of the biological growth. And so they are obviously a better choice if your intent is on preserving the stone for as long as possible. So that's all I have for you guys. I hope this has been helpful. And again, if you like the content on my channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. And if you hit the little bell button, you'll be notified anytime I upload any new videos. And remember, a person is never forgotten until the last time their name is spoken.